Tonight is not a rally, and it isn't a debate, but it will be a conversation that our 4 participants will begin, and all of us will be invited to continue that conversation during the reception that follows, and most importantly, hopefully, in the weeks that continue up until that election day, that we might speak with one another openly and with compassion and respect. So I'm delighted now to introduce our 4 participants. We have with us Father Joseph Daniels. He's an ordained Catholic priest who's currently serving as the pastor of Corpus Christi Parish in Waterville, Maine. We have the Reverend Mike Davis. He's an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, who together with his wife is co-superintendent of the Tri-State District of the New England Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. And then we have Reverend Susan M. Craig, an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, who is currently serving as Associate Conference Minister for UCC's Maine Conference. And last but not least, the Right Reverend Bishop Stephen T. Lane, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Maine. And just before we get going, I want to just share an overview of how tonight will proceed. We only have an hour together, so each participant to begin is going to share briefly their religious tradition in terms of marriage and the requirements for marriage. Then I'm going to read a scenario that calls for a pastoral response around a request for marriage by a same-sex couple. And then each participant will respond, and this is where we'll have some dialogue between them. And then to close, we'll invite each one to share something of what they've learned tonight. So, let us begin.
I guess I'll start. My name is Steve Lane, and I am the Episcopal Bishop for 65 congregations across the state of Maine. We in the Episcopal Church understand marriage to be one of the ways that, as we like to say, people grow up into Christ. That is, they become fully the people God intended them to be. There are a number of ways to do that, but traveling with a lifelong traveling companion is an important one. Marriage is really a vocation, to use a very churchy word, a calling, in which people choose to live together for their mutual benefit and intending to live together faithfully for life. In our tradition, the purposes of marriage are mutual joy, help and comfort, and the creation of families, in that order, because we understand that people need to be happy and helpful to one another before children are brought into the mix. Our tradition takes marriage very seriously. There are a number of requirements for every couple. They need to be free to marry, meaning they're old enough, not already married. One of them must be baptized. If there's been a divorce in either of their lives, a bishop must give permission for remarriage. And we require premarital counseling, teaching about how the church understands marriage, some exploration of the lives of the couple and their backgrounds. And when I do it, we always practice communication skills. Marriage in the United States is interesting because it's the only place where clergy stand in both for their churches and for the state. We have a kind of interesting dual. And for us in the Episcopal Church, that has created a bit of a dilemma because we are required by our tradition to uphold both the laws of the state and the canons of the church. And so in those states where same-sex marriage is now legal, our clergy have a pastoral dilemma in honoring both what's required by the state and by the church. Our church has given us what we call generous pastoral discretion in relation to those situations, and in several states in New England now, Episcopal churches are offering marriage to same-sex.
The issue we're speaking about tonight is sensitive, and it holds an important place for consideration in all our churches as we seek to understand, for our time and place, what it means to be faithful. Today in the United Church of Christ, as pastors, as you've heard, we participate in marriage in two ways, primarily as pastors of our churches, but also in cooperation with the state. We expect a couple to go to the local town government and acquire a marriage license, providing information necessary to the ongoing life matters of concern to the state. Following the rite of marriage, which we perform in the church or wherever we gather in the presence of God, we sign that civil license and return it to the appropriate authorities. More importantly, from the standpoint of the church, a pastor has the responsibility to meet with a couple and also has them fill out an application for marriage. He or she counsels them on several occasions concerning the covenantal nature of marriage, a relationship which calls for faithfulness and a mutually affirming, loving relationship. In this process, a couple address the important issues necessarily involved with a lifelong relationship so that they may know each other as well as possible before making the commitment to marry. In the course of this counseling, if the couple or the pastor feel they are not ready for marriage, a pastor can decide not to perform this rite. If they do feel ready to marry and the pastor approves, then plans are made for the rite of marriage to be celebrated in the presence of God and of those who love them. In the United Church of Christ, the General Synod of 2005 affirmed marriage equality. That affirmation did not come easily. It also did not come hurriedly. As early as the 1970s, exploration of human sexuality began to be a focus of the church. Much exploration was done on the subject of emerging understandings of homosexuality, coming from moral, theological, biblical, and scientific perspectives. Also during the 1970s, local churches began to participate in what we call an open and affirming process, which invites our congregations, after careful study, to choose if they want, to declare that they are open and affirming to the membership of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons into the fullness of life and ministry of the church. Local churches were not forced to participate in this process then, and they are not obligated to do so today. It continues to be a choice left to the local church and made with the consent of that particular congregation. 2 years ago, the Maine Conference of the United Church of Christ voted to be an open and affirming conference. Today in Maine, approximately 1/3 of our churches are open and affirming, and they represent about 50% of our congregants. In 2006, at the annual meeting of the Maine Conference, a resolution to live in covenant and dialogue regarding the quality and equality of marriage was passed, encouraging congregations to do prayerful, biblical and historical study while considering an end to discrimination against couples that is based on gender. In many of our churches, you will hear the statement, whoever you are and wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Welcome into the fullness of life in the church as people of faith. The rite of marriage as it is considered in our tradition has yet to be legalized in this state. Marriages are performed in other states that have passed and legalized marriage for same-sex couples. We question, we struggle, and we strive for justice while seeking to be faithful. And in so doing, we seek God's guidance as we live our faith forward.
I'm Mike Davis, co-superintendent of the Tri-State District. I won't give all the rest of that. You did a great job with that statement. Before I share what I prepared, I'm so grateful to be here today and let you know we don't know what each other was going to say, and so some of the direction I'm going is going to be a little bit different than others, which I think is a part of the richness of our dialogue together. I'm honored and I'm humbled to be here and to be a part of this time of listening and sharing with colleagues in ministry from our different faith traditions and perspectives. I know my own faith journey is enriched by such conversations, and I believe none of our traditions in and of themselves fully capture the mystery of God and faith. Sharing together, we gain a much greater understanding. Tonight I'm here representing the United Methodist Church, and also I come as one who seeks to live faithfully as a disciple of Jesus Christ. I can't separate those two identities. They come together for me. I need to preface the rest that I say acknowledging that I come from a tradition that is in a deep division about these issues. We are deeply divided, and we have been for at least 30 years. In some ways, our current doctrine and policy mirrors this division. Part is I want to share some of that with you that gives you a sense of us. I didn't choose to kind of go through the steps that folks do when they come to United Methodist Church to be married. We do have a ritual, but it's not a prescribed one. It's one that's recommended, but individual pastors have a lot of freedom in terms of how they process persons who come to them to be married and the service that they use with them. Our book of discipline, which is kind of our massive tome, gets bigger every year, delineates our official doctrine and our policy. And it says this about marriage. It says, we affirm the sanctity of the marriage covenant that is expressed in love, mutual support, personal commitment, and shared fidelity between a man and a woman. We believe that God's blessing rests upon such marriage, whether or not there are children of the union. We reject social norms that assume different standards for women than for men in marriage, and we support laws in civil society that define marriage as a union of one man and one woman. I think to engage this question, I need to share what we say in our book of discipline, some of what we say about human sexuality. Just I'm not going to give you all that we say because I only have a couple of minutes. And we don't want to have to sing Sleepers Arise after I'm done. We affirm, what we say about human sexuality, a piece of that is we affirm sexuality as God's good gift to all persons. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. Although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed only within the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. And then a little later it continues, all persons regardless of age, gender, marital status, or sexual orientation are entitled to have their human and civil rights ensured and be protected against violence. And we affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggles for human fulfillment, as well as spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God and with others. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this incompatible with Christian teaching, yet we affirm grace is available to all. We seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons. You can begin to hear in those statements the tensions within my tradition around this. And finally, in my tradition at this time, there's a prohibition from celebrating homosexual unions within a church and by United Methodist pastors. So you can hear, even in our official doctrine that we agree on, you can read between the lines and hear that we are deeply divided as a denomination around this. A part of our tradition is vigorous discussion and debate among persons of differing beliefs. We value the richness of diversity in its many forms. This is not to imply we live this out fully or even at sometimes particularly well. We recognize that persons deeply committed to Christ can and will disagree about important beliefs and issues of the day. At our best, we're committed to stay in fellowship and communion with each other in the midst of our heartfelt, faith-informed disagreements.
Good evening. Many of you are just standing up and projecting really well. Marriage is the permanent and exclusive union of one man and one woman. As one man and one woman, they are distinctive from each other. They are also complementary. Both in their distinctiveness and by which they complement, it is solely a man and a woman in marriage who can achieve that which is both unitive, becoming one flesh, and procreative, bearing new life. This immutable truth is revealed in the order of creation and in the Word of God, knowable by either human reason, or by faith, or both. Marriage is rooted in something far older and more fundamental than religious doctrine. It is natural law, which expresses and identifies the order of creation and establishes the activities of all creatures. Natural law pre-exists organized religion and government. It is the basis from which our civil laws and church law emerge. In natural law, men and women are recognized as distinct creatures. This distinction and difference has meaning. Marriage depends upon the sexual difference of men and women, which is essential to its meaning. The vows and the consent, typically exchanged in a marriage ceremony, also depend on this distinction of men and women to complete their meaning. Men and women, even as distinct creatures, are also complementary. Men and women are made for each other, physically and sexually, as well as spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically. Marriage is a unique relationship. At the heart of marriage lies this mystery of communion, in a very specific sense. A man and woman, in their distinctiveness, and by which they complement one another, truly become one. In the exclusive and permanent promise of husband and wife, they share a life together, which is totally unique. This connection of husband and wife, a communion that arises from their promises of fidelity, indissolubility, and openness to life in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, necessarily calls forth the gift of a whole person to another. The marriage vows affirm this wholeness. Speaking to another kind of human relationship, two men or two women cannot achieve the essence of what we know marriage to be. The fact and the reality is that two men or two women, in their sameness, can never fully come together to achieve either the unitive or the procreative bond, as can a man and a woman, precisely because of their difference. For our purposes this evening, the Code of Canon Law reflects how marriage is established and defined by natural law, and how it is essentially lived within our Christian faith as a sacrament. It is an articulation of marriage as being one in life and one in law. Marriage is a covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life, which by its very nature is ordered toward the good of the spouses and toward the procreation and education of children, and which between the baptized has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of the sacrament. In the Roman Catholic Diocese of the United States, it is recommended that couples undertake at least a 6-month period of focused preparation before their marriage, utilizing a variety of resources and means of presentation Couples dialogue with priests, deacons, and more frequently, married couples themselves about a variety of topics pertinent to marriage, including communication and conflict resolution, sexuality, parenting and children, spirituality, and how faith can enrich marriage, setting common priorities, and blending and respecting both home life and career, to name but a few. This premarital preparation strengthens the ground for a partnership of the whole of life. Hopefully, the couple will have continuing opportunity for further formation over the lifetime of their marriage. A word about children. Children are meant to be the gift of the permanent and exclusive union of a husband and wife. A family headed by a husband and a wife is the best place. We know it is not the only, but both public and private studies show that overall it is the best place for children to be loved, cared for, educated, and taught to be productive, creative, upright, and responsible citizens in society. When we recognize the truth about marriage and support it, we ensure that as many children as possible know and are known by, loved and are loved by, the mother and father in the exclusive marital embrace. It is in this embrace, by the grace of God, they were brought into being, and in their parents' permanent marital love, these children find their greatest security. In society, we know that both men and women are joined and engaged in a variety of relationships that contribute to the well-being and the flourishing of all. When men and women, and I would include here 2 men or 2 women, when they are able to serve the common good and engage in activities that fulfill the true good of the human person, conforming to the good promised by God and upheld by a properly formed moral conscience, these relationships deserve our respect, our care, and regard. But it is only that unique relationship between a man and a woman that can be called a marriage or recognized as a marriage in law and in fact.
All right, now that we have heard from each of you, thank you very much. I'm going to offer a scenario, and this is a pastoral scenario that all of them might face in their work in ministry. And then we're going to open it up for a conversation between them about how they might respond. So this is the scenario we are faced with. A married couple of mature age who are long-standing church members approach you seeking guidance. They have several adult children. A son is in a same-sex relationship. This mature couple also has a niece who is in a relationship with a female partner. Both their son and their niece are actively involved in their churches and have thought and prayed about the possibility of marriage to their partners. The mature couple wants to be supportive and understanding of their son and their niece and their respective partners. But the couple's personal regard and fidelity to the teaching of marriage as the union of a man and a woman is also important. The mature couple is struggling with the question as to how they might honor both the claims of their faith and their desire to care for their adult children and extended family. How might you, as pastor, guide them?
I would approach this, first of all, with a specific image of the church in my mind as being mother and teacher. In Latin, the words Mater et Magistra was the title of an encyclical written by Blessed Pope John XXIII in 1961, which called for the necessity of building authentic human communities, which at that time in many places of the world needed better health care, better schools, and better housing to promote human dignity. And that's probably still true in many places of the world today. I also envision this mature couple having accomplished a lot in life. I'd love to engage them in a little conversation about what made their marriage life distinctive, special, unique. need. Say if they were married at least 25, 30 years or more, what were the surprises along the way that set this relationship apart? I'd love for them to talk about their adult children, perhaps get them to see how they are each a unique creation, carrying not only the traits of their mother and father, but also of aunts and uncles, grandparents. Maybe they even bring the memory of a departed family member who died before they were even born. That's part of the uniqueness of marriage, in which children are the fruit of the lifelong marital embrace of a mother and father, what I was talking about just now. We're talking about something that brings together not only an intact biological family, that's what social scientists might call it. The impact of marriage in the way we understand it reaches across generations. It connects a family's past, it gives it new life in the present, and extends it into the future. This couple built an authentic community within their own family, and it happened in a profound way because of their marriage. I want to show them that. Their son in a same-sex relationship, or their niece with her partner, their relationships are special and distinct in their own way, and they deserve our respect and esteem, the human dignity piece of Mater et Magistra, that this mother and father can continue to bring. But their marriage is distinctive, it's different, it's unique.
Thank you, Joe. We're going to try to respond to one another rather than just reading statements, but this is live and not practice. So as we get started, please pardon the hitches and stops. On the Episcopal side, the request of one part of a family about another part of a family is always a little bit problematic. So one of the things I want to say is, well, let me sit down with your son and his partner, or your niece and her partner, so that I can hear from them what their concerns are. So for me, my response would be kind of two tracks. The other thing I think I would want to talk about with the mature couple is something about how we understand the intentions and purposes of marriage, and really to look at the purposes of marriage as it's outlined in our marriage service. We are a church where it's our worship book that unites us and teaches us. The Episcopal Church does not have a body of law, does not have a book of discipline to govern it, but really is focused around our worship. And so we would start there and talk about mutual joy, help and comfort, and the creation of families. In our tradition, families are not necessarily biological. They might be adopted. They might be extended. They might be informal networks of families and friends. And the word we use to talk about family life is not necessarily procreative or procreation, but generativity. We see families as a source of nurture and creativity for all the members, regardless how that family is constituted. So I would want to talk about the potential for generativity in the relationship between son and partner, or niece and her partner.
For me, and I think I'll reflect a little bit with both of you, but where I would begin would be by thanking that couple for coming in, and would be to assure them as they came to me that they were welcome and respected, and would always be welcome and respected, honored members of our congregation. And also that that I would see their son having come to them, or their son and his partner having come to them, as being a great act of trust in their parents, and that they also would continue within their relationship with us as the church to be respected as children of God, and as precious children of God. I would want to speak with the parents, and I would certainly agree with you, Steve, that I would want to speak with the couple involved to hear from them. But certainly would welcome the beginning, opening place where a couple felt the permission to come and come to the church, because I think one of the things we discover today as the church, that our church lives are becoming more and more real, more and more inclusive of all the elements of our lives. And we are no longer just a place where people come on Sunday morning dressed up, as I can remember as a child, with white gloves and saying nice things. That the wholeness of our life is what our faith is about and what God cares about. A place where I would disagree or come from a different position is looking at what I originally understood, or I think many of us have understood, as natural law that calls for a man and a woman to comprise a marriage. I think some of the things that we have been learning over the last 4 decades in our study of homosexuality is that the relationship between same-sex people, couples, is something that is no longer a preference, or that I no longer understand as a preference, but as a new understanding that it is a sexual orientation. And so that for them, the choice to seek a relationship, a lifelong relationship, hopefully blessed by God and through which they can still participate in their faith, is also part of the natural law. And I think that understanding was not part of the understanding at the times when many of our religious documentation and our Bibles were written. And I think that is a new understanding in this time and age. So that is a place, I guess, where I would vary. I would also want those young men and those young women to know that we honor the relationship that they have, that I would seek, as I spoke about before in the concept of counseling of marriage, that they would be able to be counseled, and perhaps that would be the appropriate, that choice to live together as lifelong partners would be appropriate, depending on what happened in the counseling process, but that they would be welcome within the United Church of Christ at this point for seeking a blessing of their union, and should they choose to, in other settings, the possibility of marriage exists for them. So I would share that information.
I'm going to wade into this pastoral situation, owning up that it's I think my response as a pastor, and I wouldn't want it to be necessarily descriptive of how all United Methodist pastors would respond. Maybe most of them wouldn't respond, I don't know. But I think that my starting place would be to sit and listen and find out what it is that this couple is really concerned about. And what are the issues that they're struggling with? Are the issues, what parts of those are around their faith and their understanding of faith? What parts of those are around their relationship with their children, their son and their niece? And begin helping to unpack that with them. I'd engage them in whatever conversation seems to be helpful to address those needs that they've brought. If it's around Bible study, then around that. If it's around the theology of the church, around that. If it's around, I don't know how to respond to this, we talk about their relationship for their children and their family. I remind them that their son and their niece are persons of sacred worth, loved by God, and that love is our highest calling. And so if I would err, I would invite them to err in love, whatever that will mean for them, and really help them to kind of walk that place where they are in that journey. unless they really pursued that with me, I probably wouldn't get into where the church is today because we're in such, but other than I would say we're conflicted. So if you're coming from a particular perspective, I can find someone for you to talk to. You've got them. So. And I would invite them as a part of the broader community. I would invite them with permission to be in conversations with others who are struggling with the same kind of issue, with the same kind of place, so they can find their place within the faith community of others, so they don't feel alone. I think many people feel alone with these questions, and like, I'm the only one, and they're not. So I think that's where I'd start. And then when I got really desperate, I'd call colleagues and say, what do I do?
I think that I would want to, though, not avoid the question about marriage or blessing. And we in the Episcopal Church have been discussing it for 40 years. And we've moved. This past summer, our General Convention made it possible for congregations to offer blessings of same-sex unions, and we now have an authorized service. So even responding to the theological and doctrinal questions, I would not want to back away from the actual question of what's possible for this couple, and to really talk about that as openly as possible. We Anglicans, the Episcopal Church, as part of the Anglican tradition, also value the natural law very highly. Many of the early Anglican priests and bishops were also naturalists. And so what's observably true is very important. And I share with you, Susie, some ideas that what Scripture talks about from one context 20 centuries ago, behavior that we would all, I think, consider beyond the pale, temple prostitution, pedophilia, Roman recreational practices, all the rest, is actually not what we're talking about when we talk about sexual orientation in our time, and that we do see in faithful same-sex relationships the same grace, the same love, the same compassion, the same building up that we see in heterosexual marriage as well. And so for us in the Episcopal Church, although we're, I think, very much caught between definitions and historic documents and all the rest, the movement, I think, that I perceive is the recognition of human possibility in all relationships and an attempt to respond to that, to meet that pastorally. So I think for me, pastorally, it'd be great to have the conversation, but we need to get to a concrete place where we talk about what can be done, and to make that clear and to make that offer as well.
I guess one question and concern I have, listening to everyone and looking at how we define and understand marriage, the whole principle of permanence in the marital commitment for us is very strong. And how do you address the reality of divorce in our state, divorce in our country? I think the divorce rate in this area of Maine is about 60%. In Maine, for women, it's 25% higher than the national average. For men, it's 1/3 higher than the national average. And immediately that says there's a lot of unhappy, unfulfilled people out there who've had a bad experience. And then you have to consider the effects on children. And I'm not sure that we can surrender that so easily, in the way that we talk about marriage and teach about it.
I certainly wouldn't disagree at all. We talk about lifelong, faithful, monogamous commitment. We also, I think, a number of years ago, began to recognize that staying in relationships at all costs could be even more destructive. So in our typically Anglican way, we we advocate for lifelong monogamous marriage, and we also, in certain circumstances, acknowledge that relationships have failed and look for the possibility that couples can rebuild, perhaps separately. We take very seriously divorce in the Episcopal Church. Remarriage is not possible without seeing that children and spouses from prior relationships are properly cared for. Priests are supposed to look at divorce agreements and certify that, in fact, people's needs are being met, and that in a remarriage situation, the new spouse may discover ongoing responsibilities in that relationship for children and others from prior marriages. So we don't back away anyway from responsibility around that. It gets really complicated after a while, as you know.
I think we would have similar common ground, particularly what you've described, in terms of our affirmation as well of marriage as a lifelong commitment. We also have come to a point of recognizing that there are times when a continuation of a marriage is not what's best for everyone. But that's a very serious place to come to, and not one that's easily arrived at. We don't have a prohibition, or we're not quite as structured around the issue around persons remarrying who have divorced, that is permissible. And I'm very intrigued with how involved a priest would be in relationship to that in the tradition. That wouldn't necessarily, it could be, but it wouldn't necessarily be a case in the United Methodist tradition that would happen in that way. And I would hope I'd have the I would get to the point of saying what was possible and not possible in my tradition right now, and which would be that it's not possible to be married as a same-sex couple in my tradition right now. My church is very clearly in that place. Not all my clergy are in that place. Not all my congregations are in that place, but that is our church law at the moment. So I would have to, at some point, share it with a couple, let them know.
I would agree with the importance of long-term faithful relationships and the importance of counseling in that way and trying to support that. I think the current domestic partnership arrangements in Maine for same-sex couples are less focused on long-term relationships than it would be in the case were marriage to be a possibility. I also am concerned for issues, and I guess this is leaning a little bit out of the church and toward the state, but I'm concerned for issues of inclusivity within the life of the church, that the rights of the church be open to all who feel they are part of the body of Christ. Where do we come into judging that someone is not worthy of that? And I'm concerned for, in the case of same-sex couples, I'm concerned not only for justice for them, some of which comes out of being able to participate in marriage, but also in inclusion and healthful raising of children. Same-sex couples have potential for procreation, have the potential for adoption, and their children, I'm concerned for the welfare of their children, that they feel that they are wholly loved and wholly welcomed into the life of the church and into life beyond the walls of the church. So those two concerns in there.
Mike, something you said really struck me as being important in terms of understanding our differences. In the Episcopal Church, we understand baptism as full membership of the church. And we, at least nominally, we deal with members, which is not to say that we don't see a couple coming to us as an opportunity for evangelism. But we begin with notions about people being part of the body. And baptism is full membership. So all of the rights and responsibilities of membership obtain. And so the marriage question for us is a pastoral dilemma. We're talking about faithful Episcopalians who come to their church seeking the blessing of marriage. And we have an obligation to meet them. And we are bound by the law. So marriage isn't legal in the state of Maine. We can't violate the law. But we have to pastorally meet their need, which is, in our tradition at least, again, liturgically and around worship, we have done blessings informally and here and there, and now with the new service, perhaps more formally and more. But for us, it's really about. It's not only the theological issues, but the fact that these are full members of the body of Christ. These are brothers and sisters. We're going to sit with them every week. They're members of the community, and it is very troubling to have different standards for different members of the community. Very tearing of community, and so I think part of our struggle over these last 40 years is to say, how can we give both the blessings that we have to offer and also help people be accountable in their relationships, all members, not just heterosexual.
And Steve, I think you just described pretty well the dilemma that many of our pastors feel in terms of pastorally working with members of their congregation, or in our tradition, membership comes later than baptism. In terms of full membership, it's a decision made by persons who are of an age that they can do that often. But I think you've described well that dilemma of pastorally caring for these persons who are a part of their congregation. And our congregation and our discipline does not preclude persons of any sexual orientation from being members. In fact, there's a place where it says they are open to that. In fact, and this is where we run into our challenge. Part of the way I understand kind of where we're rubbing against it for ourselves is because we understand this sexuality given by God as a gift, and that expression most fully in a marriage. We hold a standard of fidelity in marriage and celibacy in singleness, and within that, persons of any sexual orientation are welcome, even into ordained ministry. Our problem is, or our place that we rub now and struggle is around how do we, if we recognize persons who are not heterosexual, how do we provide for them a way to live out their sexuality that fits into that covenant? And we have not agreed on that, but that's the place where we get stuck. But I think you've described well the dilemma that I hear from many pastors as they try to deal with this issue related to members who come to them seeking to be married or to have their union blessed. And
From Susan, I heard, a couple strengths in what her congregation is grappling with. The study of sexuality, and the origins of sexuality, and gender identity, and gender preference is very important. I think at this date, we're not certain, of the origins and causes of this. We can't say with precision. Yet there are a number of things happening in science that we are just scratching the surface of that I think, will be a help to us going forward. And I'm intrigued by some of the observations of the medieval scholastics. They observed back in the 13th century that there are differences among us in capacities for virtue. And science is beginning to show that, in molecular biology and in brain structure. That we may be developed and created with different capacities for the practice of virtues and habits. From from Susan as well, and I'm thinking of our own tradition, we are very precise about what we mean about marriage. I don't know that we need to be as precise as we often are in our practice, in our parish planning, as to what we mean by family. I think we have to continually work at a more expensive definition of family, and I think Susan offered that in their remarks. A strength that we share and we experience and feel very profoundly with the Episcopals and the Anglicans is that marriage is the one sacrament in which a bishop, priest, or deacon is not the principal celebrant.
Who wish to join me in a time of prayer as we close this evening. Gracious God and Creator of us all, we thank you for gathering us together this evening. We pray that through the act of deep listening to one another, we be made better able to listen deeply to you. As we seek to discern your will for us, O Lord, to discern how we go about the sometimes complicated work of loving you and loving our neighbor as ourselves. Help us, O Lord, to listen, to be kind and loving, to be truthful and obedient, to be ever open to your call, and ever willing to follow you. Amen. Thank you all for coming tonight.